Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel will be Dr. Hollander with his talk titled, Is Democracy Broken? Ethan Hollander is an associate professor of political science here at Wabash College. He is also the author of Democracy and Its Alternative, a 24-lecture great course published by Wondrium. Dr. Hollander spends much of his time doom-scrolling the conflict in the Middle East and the sorry state of democracy in America and around the world. And although he thinks globally, Dr. Hollander is acting locally by serving as an elected representative on the Crawfordsville City Council. When he's not doing any of that, Dr. Hollander enjoys spending time with his wife, Professor of Economics Christy Byun, and his two kids, Isaac and Anna Sophia. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Hollander.
Good morning, Wabash.
Good morning, Dr. Hollander.
So, Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And I should start today by saying at the outset that I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not going to answer how democracy stacks up against its alternatives. It's not really my job to. As I tell my students, I teach political science, not politics. And what I mean by that is that my job is to explain how the system works, not what you should think about it. In fact, I actually think that political science is, when done right, completely apolitical. And I do think that it's one of the least political disciplines in modern academia. I'll stand by that. But in any case, my job is to explain how democracy works, not what you think about it. And so how it stacks up against its alternatives, how much you value it and why, that's a question ultimately for you. And I'm going to end what I say today with an appeal that you do just that, an appeal that you consider how much it is that you value democracy and why. And so, what I can say, though, is that democracy just doesn't look like it's in very good shape these days, right? Churchill's pessimism really seems justified. I mean, democracy certainly looks broken. The polarization, the gridlock, the extremism, just the tone of everything. You remember the last couple elections? Armed men at the polling stations? Candidates for political office saying that they'll respect the results of the election if they win. I should also say, by way of disclaimer here, that I am currently a candidate for political office, right? The Crawfordsville City Council elections are going on right now, and I honestly wouldn't have accepted this invitation to speak today if I thought there was some kind of conflict of interest or if it even looked like that. But, for good or for ill, I'm running unopposed. So you're stuck with me. And I can then comfortably say that you definitely should go out and vote. I think the elections, it's the Tuesday of the week after next. Please, if you can, go out and vote. Democracy needs you maybe more than ever. So all joking aside, right, the situation in politics today really is tense. Elections these days are decided by razor-thin margins. I mean, it's come to the point where our decisions are ultimately made as much by the weather as anything else. And I mean that literally, by the weather. Political scientists have long observed that when the weather is bad, moderates tend to stay home, whereas people with more extreme political views, they tend to go out and vote no matter what. We get a freak snowstorm on the next election day, and that could be the difference between a return to normalcy and the dissolution of American democracy. So anyway, on that cheery thought, right, there are also ways in which we're playing Russian roulette with our democracy. There are only so many times that an angry mob can storm the Capitol building and not kill the vice president. There's only so many times that a lunatic can show up at the house of a Speaker of the House or a chief, a justice of the Supreme Court or a governor and not kidnap the person inside. And if that's true, well, then it's also only a matter of time before something like that happens during the run-up to an important vote, where the deciding vote was about to be cast by the person in question. And if that happens, we're in the middle of a constitutional crisis that we can't even imagine at this point. You know what, it's kind of like a bridge, right? If you think that a bridge that has some kind of structural problem to it, right? It's structurally broken. It looks fine, and it's almost as if we're just kind of waiting for a truck that's big enough to go by to bring the whole system down. And so on that cheery thought, what I want to talk about today is to answer the question, is democracy broken? And I want to do so with reference to two particular issues, two particular ways in which it might be broken. On the one hand, I want to talk about gridlock, political paralysis, right? The fact that government just can't seem to govern anymore. And on the other hand, I want to talk about polarization and extremism, the fact that our elected representatives include racists and radicals and conspiracy theorists of the left and of the right, people who have fringy political viewpoints that we just don't think of as being compatible with modern-day democracy. And let me offer a few statistics to illustrate just how dire the situation is. According to Pew Research, 63% of Americans believe that the Republican Party is too extreme. 61% of Americans, so basically the same number, think that the Democratic Party is too extreme. About half, I mean, this is even worse now, about half of both political parties, or excuse me, about half of both political parties, right? 47% of Democrats and 45% of Republicans think that their own political party is too extreme. And, you know, we could argue all day long about whose extremism is more extreme, about whose extremism is more dangerous, you know, about whose extremism is based in flimsier facts. But the sad fact of the matter is that those conversations aren't likely to go very far, particularly because the fact of our division is so true. And the extremism, the division, really is real. The right believes that America can do no wrong. The left believes that America can do no right. We have left-wing representatives who openly call for defunding police, you know, the kind of people for whom Abraham Lincoln isn't woke enough. And we have right-wing representatives who believe in conspiracy theories, like the one that says that, you know, school shootings are faked, right? As you do. and this is my favorite. You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, a representative from Georgia, who actually believes that Jews, you know, international Jewry, controls a giant space laser. And this is true, right? And evidently, this is the laser that they use to kind of keep track of you using the microchip that was implanted when you got your COVID vaccine, right? And this isn't fiction. Wait, hold up. The space laser is fiction. But the fact that she believes it is very, very real and just a little bit scary. And I have to say that it also makes me feel really bad. I mean, as a lot of you know, I'm Jewish. And I'm always the last to know. And the next time we have one of our little secret meetings, I'm going to totally complain that nobody told me about this. That and the bagels are stale. I mean, being a member of, you know, an elder of Zion is just not what it used to be. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Is democracy broken, and particularly, is it broken with reference to the gridlock and the paralysis and to the extremism? So is democracy broken? Well, first, what is democracy? And before that, what is politics? Well, politics, put simply, is the way we make group decisions when the people in the group want different things. Think about the last time that you and a couple friends got together to order a pizza. What was the conversation that immediately followed? Toppings, right? As you know, toppings can be very controversial. You have meat lovers, you have an oppressed minority, vegetarians, you have people with kind of fringy, weird views, like people who like anchovies. And you have people with like outright repugnant views, the sort of racists of the pizza-eating world, people who want to put pineapple on a pizza. I knew that that would get the biggest reaction. I just knew it. Well, the question is, if we're only going to order one pizza, how do we decide? How do we make a collective decision when people in the group want very different things? Well, we could vote on it. I mean, that would be quick, that would be easy, and let's face it, we'd probably agree that most of the people should get what they want most of the time. But, you know, voting on it could also be a little bit mean, right? I mean, what if you had 3 meat eaters and 2 vegetarians? I mean, the meat lovers could order a meat lover's pizza and leave the vegetarians with nothing. Now, you could order a second pizza, but what stops the meat lovers from ordering a second meat pizza? And of doing that again and again and again, essentially locking the vegetarians out of the political process with no hope of ever getting their, fair share of the pie. Now, of course, in the real world, the minorities that are excluded are not vegetarians, but more often than not, right, representatives of an unpopular religious or racial group. And the public goods from which they're excluded is not pizza, but property or liberty or life itself. It's no joke to say that genocide is sometimes the product of the majority's unchecked success. Well, this is a situation that political scientists call tyranny of the majority, right? And it's not an exaggeration that preventing tyranny of the majority was probably the central concern of the American founding fathers, right? That was the thing they were most concerned with. They talked a lot about their fear of tyranny, and of course that included fear of the British monarchy, that tyranny too. But just as much or more, they feared the tyranny of the majority that they might be creating by creating a democratic system. Well, to figure out how societies really go about trying to prevent tyranny of the majority, think for a second about how you would actually go about ordering that pizza. I mean, particularly if you were a group of just 5 friends. Because the fact of the matter is, you probably wouldn't vote on it. You'd probably talk it out and kind of arrive at some kind of compromise that everybody was okay with, even if it was nobody's favorite, right? This is something that we call consensus, right? You'd do things by consensus. You'd reach a consensus that everybody was at least ready to acquiesce to. And you could, actually one example of a consensus that might happen is maybe the meat eaters would say, all right, vegetarians, we'll order a vegetarian pizza, but we get to choose what the vegetables are, right? That kind of thing, right? Now, in real societies, there are ways of actually forcing consensus, even when the individuals in the group don't have each other's best interests in mind. I mean, think about a situation where you set up a rule that all decisions required unanimous consent. I mean, now you would effectively do away with the possibility of tyranny of the majority. Because if even one person objected, well, they would vote no, and the offending decision wouldn't come to pass, right? Unanimous consent puts into place a fail-safe protection against tyranny of the majority. But notice that it also comes along with a really bad disadvantage. Decision-making becomes harder, right? Negotiation takes time. There might not be a single decision that everybody's okay with, right? A simple majority vote has the benefit that it's easy. You just vote and reveal who wins. But if the majority gets its way, keep in mind that there's nothing in terms of minority protections, right? Every step you take to prevent tyranny of the majority makes government come along with the risk of paralysis and gridlock. This is the fundamental dilemma of representative democracy. There's a trade-off between efficiency and representation. Features that protect minority interests inevitably come along with a tendency to interfere with the government's ability to govern. As James Madison said, in the first place, you have to make government able to govern, but in the next place, you have to oblige it to govern itself. Now, on the level of cities or states or countries, you really can't go for unanimous consent. Then you really wouldn't get anything done. But there are institutions that kind of push things in a more consensus direction. In the US system, the checks and balances, the separation of powers, federalism, even arcane procedural rules like the filibuster, which essentially says that the Senate has to have a 60% vote before it could do anything. All of these things kind of put in a tendency for government to represent or even over-represent minority interests, but they also make it hard for the government to make any decisions at all. It's only a slight exaggeration to say that the US was designed to be inefficient. It's guided by a principle that a government can't find it easy to oppress people if it can't find it easy to do anything at all. And so back to our two scenarios, right, or our two aspects of representative democracy that worry us. The gridlock, well, sorry to say, it's purposeful. Right? In some political systems, and especially in the American political system, it was designed to be inefficient. Paralysis is a feature, not a bug. Even the radicalism of our leaders can be seen as evidence that the system is working. I mean, if ordinary citizens have become more polarized and extreme, wouldn't we expect our elected representatives to be the same? Wouldn't it, in fact, be a failure of democracy if our leaders didn't reflect the views, even the radical views, of the people they represent? I mean, sure, Representative so-and-so is a homophobe, and Senator what's-his-face is an anti-Semite, and, I don't like that. But the sad fact of the matter is that society has homophobes and anti-Semites in it, and democracy says that they get representation too. The extremism of our elected officials is evidence of democracy's success. Society may be broken, but democracy is working just like it was designed. That's what worries me. Now, lest you think that I'm just kind of splitting hairs or playing a game, right? America is broken, but democracy is working fine. Let me assure you that this is a really crucial distinction. It would be nice to think that democracy was broken. If democracy was broken, then an institutional quick fix would be the only thing standing between America as it is and America as it could be. I mean, that would be nice to believe. It'd be like if you went to the doctor and you knew you were sick and the doctor said, hey, good news, your underlying health is fine. Take these pills, change your diet a little, and you'll be good as new. That is a great diagnosis to hear. But it's a terrible diagnosis if it's not true. And with our current situation, unfortunately, I just don't think it is. I mean, how many times have you heard people say, if only we didn't have the Electoral College, if only we could get rid of the filibuster. I read an article the other day that said, if only the United States could have a multi-party parliamentary democracy like they have in Britain. As if British politics these days is really the model of the democratic ideal. Right, but there really is this kind of ingrained belief that it's the institutions that are at fault, I think caused by an unwillingness to look at the inconvenient truth that the problems might be deeper than that, right? The problems might be with our society. And that, the British case, is one of the reasons that I think the problem is deeper than that, right? That the failing is with America, or maybe with the world, and not with our institutions. I mean, if the problem was institutional, then somebody has to explain to me why democracy is in decay all around the world. Right? Somebody has to explain to me why moderates are losing ground, not just here, but in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, in Israel, in Palestine. Right? If you really want to know what's at root of that crisis, right? It might be just the very fact that there aren't enough moderates on both sides. There you go. I waded into that, and I really didn't want to. You'd also have to explain to me why the problems with democracy are coming about now, when the institutions that are supposedly at fault have been around for decades or even centuries, right? The Electoral College did give us Donald Trump, but it also gave us, Jefferson and Lincoln and Washington and Roosevelt. Gerrymandering has been around for 200 years. But, it's only recently that it's really motivated by such crass political partisanship. It used to be motivated more by, good old-fashioned corruption and cronyism. But whatever the reasons for democracy's decay, and I'm not going to go into them now. If you want to know more about democratic decay, I encourage you to look into Democracy and Its Alternatives. Where I do go into that, get your copy now. But regardless of the reasons for why this is happening now, it really just does seem like America, or maybe the world, is going to hell in a bucket, and that the institutions are just kind of along for the ride. Now, adding urgency to the issue is that democracy, even in its current state, still has this kind of persistent power to lend legitimacy to collective decisions. For whatever reason, we're just more likely to go along with collective decisions if we think that those decisions were arrived at democratically. And so if that's the case, consider this. We live in a country where a good portion of the country, maybe almost half, believe that in 2016, we legitimately elected a corrupt fascist as president. There's a comparable portion of the American electorate on the other side that thinks in 2008 we elected a foreign-born Muslim terrorist, socialist, whatever they called him, right? Now, I happen to believe that one of these is just a little more likely than the other to be true, but that's not the point, right? The other side believes its story with the same conviction that I believe mine, and they fear my ideal every bit as much as I fear theirs. In fact, the only thing we really agree on is that democracy is this close to empowering the very people that seem intent on destroying it. And if that's the case, we have to think really carefully about if, and if so, why we value a system that's simply so good at representing people who actively want our own personal doomsday scenario to come to pass. We have to think about the wisdom of arming a broken society with a political system that gives legitimacy to, that gives voice to its worst impulses. If it's between that and, throwing the dice with a dictatorship that may or may not be benevolent, I'm not sure the answer is as obvious as I used to think, right? At least the dictator would probably get something done. And so the question I want to leave you with today is kind of a follow-up from the question that I started with. The question isn't, is democracy broken? I'm pretty convinced that the world might be broken. Democracy is working as it was designed. The question I want to leave you with is, if society is broken, why do we want democracy in the first place? I look forward to hearing your answers.